I'm the Managing Director for the Experience Studio at LiquidHub. I'm joined today by Michelle Berryman, Managing Director of Strategy and Innovation, and Andrew Hogan, Analyst at Forrester Research. LiquidHub is a digital transformation company focused on creating compelling end-user experiences grounded in deep technical proficiency. As such, we find ourselves operating outside of the browser quite often, which is why we're glad to have Andrew here today to help us all understand what blended experiences are and how they operate in the real world. Quick procedural point, please ask questions at any time during the webinar, and we will answer as many as possible at the end. And now I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to get us started. Andrew?
Great, thanks so much, Daniel. So I think probably the first place we should start, once the slide changes, the first place we should start is to talk about what is a blended experience. And you know, what we're really talking about here is the concept that Forrester has mentioned in our Digital Customer Experience Trends 2015. Here they are. Bear with me one moment. So a concept that Forrester's talked about in our Digital Customer Experience Trends 2016. We highlighted this along with things like concierge services and finding the right place for humans in predominantly screen-based digital experiences. So we had a range of things in here. And you know, blended experiences cross company and channel boundaries. They're things that go from screen to screen, from company to company, and kind of bring things together. And this is happening because we've got such tremendous consumer tech adoption. These are the latest numbers. I think we all have seen them and understand just how many adults have cell phones and smartphones, and how many have tablets. So it's easy to go from screen to screen and make that part of the daily ritual and daily consumer behavior. And you know, this is reflected in the number of sales, for example, that are going to have a mobile cross-channel component. Forrester estimates that in 2016, more than 30% will have a mobile cross-channel component. This is just retail sales. So at some point in the purchase lifecycle, whether it's product research, whether it's in-store interactions, there's going to be a mobile component. So those purchases might actually occur elsewhere, creating kind of a blended experience. And this is just one example. And the need to design for blended experiences is absolutely paramount right now with the rising expectations that all businesses are dealing with. Forrester's recent survey of business decision makers, 58% said that addressing rising customer expectations was a top business priority for 2016. So this is a major consideration. And these blended experiences sometimes bring brands together. United integrating Uber, the Uber API, Hinge, which is a dating app integrating the Uber API. I think we're all also familiar with Google Maps with the Uber API. You know, where does Uber start and United begin? Where does United stop? Those are difficult questions. And then you have Instacart and Whole Foods with a partnership that looks basically like they're the same experience. And from a customer perspective, it is the same sort of blended experience. These blended experiences also bring services with products. So the Amazon Dash button, you know, it's a button, but it also connects to Amazon's Dash replenishment services. And it's something Forrester's interested in, with one of our analysts, James McQuivey, calling it the best bad idea of 2015. These integrations also connect into products themselves, creating a blended experience. So Amazon has a whole set of Dash replenishment products. You know, a Whirlpool, a washing machine that reorders when you're out, a Brita water filter that reorders water filters when you need a new one, which is of course critical because it's really difficult to remember to change your water filter. So Amazon has connected their Dash replenishment service with individual products, creating a blended experience. And then of course products to products. Nest recently announced a partnership with Amazon's Alexa, where you'll be able to control your Nest through an Echo or another sort of Alexa device. And this is notable because it was sort of possible before with if this then that, but that's a kind of a kludgy sort of way of bringing these things together. So this is a more seamless kind of connection and experience that's being brought forth here, and it's one that the products didn't ship with. Neither one sort of talked to each other out of the box, and now this is being added. And I know LiquidHub has done some thinking around some different ways of thinking about experiences. Michelle, did you want to add?
No, that's absolutely right, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the idea that products are no longer bounded in terms of what you get when you buy them is the only thing that it will ever be or do. We do expect things to change and evolve now, and we expect more connectivity between devices.
Yeah, perfect. And so these are all possible, and these blended experiences can occur because there's a growing interface layer, and it hides complexity from consumers. So on the left, I talked about smartphones, but if you've got sort of a controller in everyone's pocket, that makes it all seem very simple. You press a button, something occurs, the experience seems more seamless, it works theoretically well. And then, of course, there's Panera in the middle there with the ordering kiosks. This sort of, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes here, but this interface makes it seem simpler. And then there's Pointer, which is, for those of you who don't know, they have a micro warehouse solution, and they put tablets on the walls of dressing rooms so that you don't have to talk to the associate anymore. You just press the button and you get a new product delivered to your dressing room while you're getting changed. So you get a new size, you get a new color, a new item altogether. So these interfaces sort of pop up. But then there's also Alexa and the Echo and the interface that enables. It's a voice interface, so sometimes it's different than the way we think of the word interface. But this sort of voice interface that blankets things allows you to have much more seamless blended experiences than you would otherwise have. So the keys here in blending physical and digital, and LiquidHub will talk about an example in a moment, are an appropriate sort of experience. So I mentioned Pointer earlier. One of the things they tried is actually greeting people as they walked in as part of an experiment, and that went pretty poorly. But there's the ability to be appropriate and solve a real need that can be done well. So Harrison Hooley in the UK has an opt-in opportunity where, as the minute you walk in, they can start making your drink. So it's solving a need. People, kind of like to feel welcome. They also like things to happen faster, but it's doing it in a way that feels appropriate. There's also Articulate. So when you start bringing all these things together, I made sort of a half joke earlier about things being theoretically simpler with a growing interface layer. Things will go wrong, and it means that error handling needs to be done better. I think we've all experienced something that should have worked well theoretically and then did not actually end up delivering. Or if you've ever seen sort of one of those restart your machine notices when you're looking at some sort of piece of digital signage, you can tell that that's the kind of thing that could definitely happen. So error handling is critical. And then apparent. We have all these things and ways of interacting with our smartphones and our tablets. New gestures, new methods of interaction It must be very careful of how those things are done, implemented, how often they're used, because people struggle to learn new things often, and sometimes it just doesn't work. You know, I mentioned Panera earlier. You can still order from the Panera register. It's not all the digital kiosks where the ordering can happen. So there's the ability to sort of switch modes, and that's clear from the beginning. It's not all just robots. They have people standing by. So these things are critical, and I'll pass it over to LiquidHub to talk about their experiences and how they're doing this kind of work today.
Thanks, Andrew. I think one of the things about LiquidHub and our approach is that we consider ourselves to be digital anthropologists. And by that I mean we're a diverse group of people with a wide variety of backgrounds. We're designers and strategists, we're researchers, we're engineers. We observe humanity, we observe the way people use technology. So we do a lot of contextual inquiry and observational research, as well as a lot of other qualitative methods of research to understand how people move through their day and how they move from device to device. And then we also live this way. So it's not just about watching people engage with technology, but it's also about embracing technology in our own lives in a really meaningful way on a day-to-day basis. One of the reasons that this is so important to us is that we believe it's critical to understand your customer, to understand who you're designing for, to understand what their needs are, what those mobile moments look like for them, what they seek to do both from an emotional standpoint as well as a functional standpoint, to understand how to design the right kind of experience so that it does feel seamless, so that the technology feels natural and the experience itself feels natural for them. And we try to learn as much as we can, and we do this again through qualitative and quantitative research methods. We look at the analytics, we see what people do on screens, we see what they click and where they go, but we also watch their behavior, and we do a lot of in-depth interviews with people to find out what their motivations are, to find out what events and activities triggered their decision points and drove them to seek new information or new experiences, or even to understand the aspirations that they've got for why they want to accomplish certain things in their lives, and how digital can be a part of that answer. One of the things that we focus on at LiquidHub is the idea of cadence, and the fact that we do move from device to device and from screen to screen across the course of the day, and that there's always a physical component to this as well. There is the physicality of the device itself that we're interacting with, but these interactions take place in a variety of contexts. So we might check our email first thing in the morning while we're still laying in bed. We might be doing work while we're commuting on the train. We could be in a store and we're researching a product. We might order our lunch on our phone and then go and pick it up in the restaurant. We seamlessly want to move from screen to screen. We want to get the right information at the right moment in the right place. We might get a warning message from our car that it's time for an oil change while we're in the car on the dashboard of the car, but we might want to then get that same message again later on a mobile device to remind us to schedule the appointment. There are a lot of ways that this plays out, and the idea of thinking about how people move from screen to screen, what the intensity of those interactions look like, both in terms of the duration and in terms of the activities taking place in the moment, is a really important part of how we think about these blended experiences. And I mentioned this earlier, people are becoming accustomed to the idea that products evolve. So there was a point in time when we bought products and we expected them to be what they were and they would never change. And now we buy products and we've really become accustomed to the idea that through a software upgrade or a firmware upgrade, New functionality will be unlocked, and our device will do new and different things for us. We are very much accustomed to this when we look at the Apple products that most of us have in our lives, but we see it in a big way too with products like Tesla, where they're not just changing the interface on the dashboard of the car, but through software updates, they can actually change the suspension of the vehicle or the handling characteristics, the way the car responds to them. That's a really, really big change. So the possibility that the products that we buy in the future will simply be vehicles for an evolving experience is very much ingrained in the consumer mindset at this point in time.
We're going to talk a little bit about a client of ours that we've done some really interesting blended experience work for. We started out with Edward Andrews, which is a residential home builder down in Atlanta, Georgia, and we started looking at their digital channel. Many home builders were not as sophisticated as they might have been in the digital channel through just basic things like using the website, making sure that it was mobile friendly so that people could search listings and get additional information as they were out on site, looking at a particular house. And so we helped them rethink their digital presence, bring it up a level, and really think about what the end user wanted to use, what the consumer needed, and where they needed it, and what screen they needed it on. But through the course of working with them, we discovered that there was a business problem that they needed to solve around the custom home buying experience. When you buy a home, it's not finished, and so you need to make a huge number of decisions about pulls and materials and tile and fireplaces, anything you can imagine, down to the front door. All of these decisions are confusing, and many times there's two people trying to make that decision, and they may have differing aesthetic sensibilities. They may not be able to really understand what something looks like or is going to look like once it's installed, so there's hesitation, and all of those factors contributed to costing Edward Andrews, our client, a lot of time and money as they tried to work their customers through all of these complex decision-making processes. So we helped them take a step back and define the different points where we could introduce a digital tool to help get to a more confident yes. The faster we get to a good decision and a confident decision that's not going to be retraded, the more that adds to their bottom line. So we developed a series of tools starting with a style quiz. It was just a very simple iPad-oriented quiz that helped people through non-technical jargon determine what they liked in terms of interior and exterior design. So many times people would come into the design studio and say, oh, I like modern, but it would take several meetings for the interior designers to realize that the customer didn't really understand what modern meant. So this style quiz was very key in getting both the couples on the same page and giving our interior designers a pre-knowledge of what the couples were going to be interested in, so that they could select appropriate choices, narrow down the number of choices, and present those choices in a very visual manner when the clients came in, so that it was less overwhelming and they could get to, everybody ultimately wants to see a physical sample, but you don't want to narrow down from 40 choices, you want to narrow down from 4. So this enabled our designers to get a lot more done, a lot faster, and everybody was much happier with the overall process. We also helped them to design the interior of the design studio. This does not look like most home builders' design studios. Most design studios look like you're walking into a little Home Depot with vignettes of kitchens, and they're just hard to maintain and manage. They're always out of date. Our design center is digitally focused. It's a beautiful, big, physical space, but the tools are digital. And so we can stay up to date with the next, season's appliance models, with the, newest tiles, the newest finishing surfaces. And as a matter of fact, this year, our company, Edward Andrews, is a small regional builder, won the Gold Award at NAHB for the best design center. This is a little bit of a David and Goliath situation. We were very proud of them. They were very happy to have done this. Industry awards are always wonderful to receive, and they're great, great accolades. But at the end of the day, it's just an award. So for our client, introducing these blended experiences, digitally enabling the design studio actually adds significantly to the bottom line, because overall, and what you're seeing is different levels of homes, from the the most expensive to the least expensive. Overall, we've been able to reduce this time in the design studio by half. So when you're building hundreds of houses, you're carrying permits, you're carrying loans on each lot. Reducing the time by that much is a really significant impact for their bottom line. So we're very happy to be able to see the results over time, over this last year period, and know that we were able to deliver, a result that really impacted their bottom line and helped their overall consumer experience.
So now let's talk about what it actually takes. What was just presented there by LiquidHub was sort of an end product, but let's talk about what sort of goes into this and how it has to happen. I think LiquidHub mentioned the customer, and I think that's exactly right. So the first place to start is by understanding the right customer. So here, if you think about what Wealthfront is trying to do versus what Edward Jones is trying to do, you can really see that the target's very different. Wealthfront's looking at a millennial customer who thinks that having a 100-year-old financial institution is actually liability. Edward Jones is looking at somebody who really wants an advisor and a person. Wealthfront's customers, the millennial, thinks that a robot could do this and has a whole robo-advisor sort of mentality. And these are sort of insights and distinctions that aren't necessarily understood just through a survey. I mean, yes, you could theoretically have a survey and it would say, I trust banks 25%, versus I trust banks for somebody who's a little older at 38%, and you'd get a number you could compare. But there's a sort of a need for a deep ethnographic understanding through immersion and through conversations and through understanding what the whole process is. That is really necessary to create a blended experience, because you have to know what people are trying to get out of the purchase itself or the decision itself, beyond how they're weighing competitors against each other. So it's an understanding of the customer, and then it's looking at the right places. So here on the right, we have an example of a journey atlas, which is a concept we talk about at Forrester that combines multiple customer journeys together. So you can see sort of across the top, the sort of life cycle kind of organizing principle, and then you can see the various journeys. So this is for a health insurance provider. It's hypothetical. Finding a provider, looking at plan options within this discover and evaluate. Those are individual journeys that might kind of connect together. Joining, so they might contact sales for help or sign up online. You kind of get the idea. And the dots here are customer satisfaction. So once you sort of understand what the various journeys are, and you've got them kind of arrayed out, you also need to look at the health. So these red dots indicate there's a real problem under find a provider. There's a real problem under verify plan coverage. Filing a claim is clearly just not going well in this atlas. So looking at the right places to focus becomes very important, because you sort of have to look at which ones will have the biggest impact. How could you create a blended experience that does a better job accomplishing user goals? And then from there, it's looking at what's happening behind the scenes. So we had a red dot under find a provider. Why is that? What's happening sort of at the front? What's the customer doing? So this is an example journey map. You have customer actions along the top. I know it's tough to read, but trust me, they're customer interactions. And then you have sort of the actual customer communications. and then you have the sort of the what's happening kind of behind the scenes. This is the line of visibility. So what's front of stage and what's back of stage, and what are the support processes? And often looking at these kinds of things unveils real opportunities and ways in which the experience can be enhanced through adding digital capabilities or changing digital capabilities, or sometimes adding human capabilities to existing digital interactions. So it's really important to look at service blueprints and journey maps to unearth all those things and understand what could be and where the real points of opportunity are. So then that's all great, right? But which of these actually matter to the business? So, what's the link between business and customer benefits? The UK's government digital services said that they wanted to make things that were simpler, clearer, and faster to use, which is the sort of thing you might hear from any company or organization that's trying to make its experience better. I think the difference here is that they talked about how an online service would be 20 times cheaper than a phone transaction for the UK government, 30 times cheaper than by post, 50 times cheaper than face-to-face. You can tell it's a real quote because I left post in there, which is clearly it's the English way of thinking of it, but by mail. And these changes actually have led to 3.5 billion pounds in savings over the last few years for the UK government. And that's a pretty remarkable achievement, to have some sort of lofty comment, link it to business benefit, and then actually deliver.
The British Design Council has been tracking the value of design for products and services for a number of years, and they've got solid evidence to show that this is in fact reality. And we're actually starting to see our own government making similar changes, hiring a lot of user experience designers and retooling our government sites and systems. The Australian government has also launched a digital transformation initiative that is looking to retool how they provide services to their citizens as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's clear that there's something there, and if governments are tapping into it, I think that says something about where other organizations should be going. So then the other important part in doing this work, so you've got your lofty ideals, you've linked it to business benefit, you're focused in the right place, you understand your customer. It's really easy to get distracted throughout the process of creating a blended experience. It's really simple to start adding things. When I talked to Visa about Visa Checkout recently, they sort of told me about the process that they went through to create it. And one of the big things that jumped out at me is that they had this problem statement that they wanted to make it as easy to pay digitally as it is to pay physically. And every time somebody started to add something, some new feature, a new thing, a new addition, the team just said, no, we're making it as easy to pay digitally as it is to pay physically. And that kept them on track as they created a new way of thinking about Visa that I think we've seen advertised pretty heavily and seen rolling out.
The other thing that's interesting about Visa as a case study is that this is a company that inherently does not have a big physical presence. So the extent to which we have a physical contact with Visa is the plastic card in our wallets. And when you remove that completely from the mix and you're doing everything digitally through your phone or through other channels, their brand becomes even more invisible in some ways. And yet clearly they see that the potential here is tremendous for them.
Right. So then if we move on, I think it's also important to talk about, I mentioned that things could go very wrong. And when you blend experiences together, the number of potential issues just increases. So I want to share a story that I heard about a tablet application. And it was a major grocery store, and they developed a really great tablet app for custom cake design. And it was pretty. It worked really well. Everything seemed to be good. They started to roll it out, and what they found is that they hadn't tested it enough in the real world. They hadn't seen what happens when you get, a tablet in a bakery, and how dirty tablets in bakeries get, and how gloves make it difficult. And the interactions that this sort of created between customers and their bakery associates actually led to a really negative perception, and they had to rethink their approach to the tablet app. And that's why it's really important to get prototypes going in the real world to see what might happen and what is it that we're not considering and what sorts of things need to change to make this occur. So I think it's important to think when you're thinking about blended experiences that these all require partnerships, integration, versus real tight control. And that's the sort of thing that doesn't just kind of happen. It happens through a great amount of communication and discussion and sort of a give and take and figuring out what's in it for each different party, whether that's another brand or whether that's another line of business.
That's right, Andrew. And I think.
Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that was an important point in us creating the systems that we used for Edward Andrews. There were a number of different builder-focused applications that were not consumer-friendly, but we still had to work with all of those companies, show them what the benefit was going to be, so that we could integrate all of that data and bring that simple layer of the interface over to very complex systems.
Right. And it's the sort of thing that happens with the second what it means, that it's a commitment to holistic customer experience, not just digital customer experience. It's not enough to create the application itself. It's not enough to create or change the website itself. It's thinking about how all those things make the customer experience better versus in service of simply digital channels. And that's the kind of thing that only happens if you have human-centered and service design practices. The sorts of things, customer journey mapping comes out of service design and is old hat to that group, but customer journeys are helping organizations across the world create better experiences simply by bringing them together to think holistically and to think about what the problem is that they're trying to solve for people, which is really the center of human-centered design processes. So
we're going to share one more.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. We're going to show one more quick example that follows Andrew's points of prototyping in the real world. One of our clients is Orkin, a pest control company, and they have a particular problem with setting pest traps, mainly rodent traps and things like that, and that there are regulations around how often they have to check the traps, and so they end up rolling trucks a lot when they didn't really need to. So one day we decided to go to Home Depot and get a couple of components, some Raspberry Pis and Arduino and a little camera, and we made a rat trap that was digitally enabled, so that when it was set off, the camera took a picture and sent an SMS to an operator so that they would know that the trap had been sprung. So this was, we walked around with this over at Orkin and talked to people about it, and it is actually now in production. It's a rodent trap, not a rat trap, so it's a little bit smaller, but it's in production, and they are going to be using this year to install in homes. So it's a simple example of putting prototypes in the real world that have a certain digital component, but also serve a real business function.
Great. So I think we'll go from there to questions. And Daniel, is it *7? Is that right?
I believe so, yeah. All right, let's see. All right, here we go. Digital or in-store approaches are still very siloed. How can someone in a siloed organization create a better blended experience? And then there's a follow-up. Omnichannel is extremely different, and older companies are at a disadvantage because they have so many processes already in place that aren't conducive to omnichannel. How do you recommend dealing with this situation?
Yeah, so I'll jump in, and the LiquidHub folks feel free to add as well. I think all those things are true. I think it is very difficult, and I think silos are very tough to break. But I think there's a few key things. There's the sort of the need to use those service design and holistic sort of design thoughts to map the experience, understand where the opportunities are, and then once you start linking those things to business benefits or business pain, it becomes harder and harder to ignore. And so that's one of the big things that we see. You create this real either a burning platform or a really, really clear business case that something needs to happen, and you just keep beating the drum. And then you start to have wins, and you start to bring up those wins when there are discussions to be had about what's going to happen next. And that's when we see it working. And it doesn't always happen overnight. Sometimes it takes an extended period of time or even a leadership change. But it does happen if you take those kinds of approaches rather than simply thinking in terms of sort of single channel optimization.
I think I'd like to add on to that too, Andrew, that omnichannel is really hard, and it's largely still a myth in the marketplace because it is so difficult to do. But that's also why we see the need for changing org structures inside of companies, creation of roles like a chief digital officer that has oversight and is able to span across the various silos and organizational structures that currently exist. And the companies that are doing a good job with this recognize that businesses' decisions that were made in the past, they were made for the right reasons at the time, but there is an evolution that needs to happen, and customers don't care about your business processes or your business model, and they don't want to see it. They want a seamless experience. They want great customer service. They want great products. They want to have a wonderful experience with your brand. And they're going to gravitate to the companies that are able to provide those things for them.
Andrew, when you talk about organizational change, I believe Forrester started talking about the role of the Chief Experience Officer pretty early on, like 2011, 2012. Have you seen that being adopted at companies?
Yeah, so we have to some extent. We've also seen, chief customer officers. I'll also say that many existing C-suite executives also have sort of taken up the mantle. So, it isn't always that there's an increase in the number of, individuals with that title. It's also taking up the mantle of that responsibility. And certainly you see this in Silicon Valley, where you have things like chief product officers, which are trending in that direction. And you have sort of a greater adoption and understanding that the mindset of experience design and good experience design is necessary for business success. So you see lots of startups being founded by designers, and you see the number of those increasing as well. Great.
Thank you. All right, let's see. All right, this is a good one. Here we go. Is this actually a new concept? Hasn't industry discussion focused on interface layer, mobile, and Internet of Things potential to transform the customer experience by blending digital and physical for a while? So is this new, blended experiences?
So that's a great question. I think it's new in the sense that we're seeing it happen. How about that? Instead of it being a theoretical thing, you actually have Panera with screens in stores that are doing up to 50-60% of the transactions during busy periods. You have Starbucks doing mobile order ahead. 20% of payments are happening through mobile, and Starbucks is actually getting greater number of transactions through allowing mobile order ahead. I think the number in the last earnings report was a 10% increase in their busiest stores, which their CEO said is actually helping us reduce attrition off the line. So connecting those things together and thinking about how they could work better together is really happening. I think probably analysts and many agencies too were all kind of guilty of jumping on the bandwagon maybe a little too early. But I think that's partially because of how long these things take. It doesn't just happen overnight. Right. So we're trying to see the future and what to build now, so that you're not left behind in 2 or 3 years. Because I think there's still an opportunity to be early in this, in the actual execution, if not early in the concept.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. We always talked about it. This year was the year of mobile from I think 2005 to 2010, and so it wasn't a new concept when it finally arrived, but it did finally arrive. And so I think that what we're seeing now is the first real examples of these kind of blended experiences that have business impact and therefore tangible and meaningful to the executives coming into the marketplace. And I agree with you that I think that there still is a chance in many, many industries to be well ahead of the curve.
Yes. Yes.
All
I mean,
right.
if you think about your home builder example, right. It's a screen that is a tablet app that streamlined an existing process. It's the hard part is getting it out and executed and changing the processes.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
They had a whole range of applications that were running on antiquated systems. So just pulling the data out of those systems was a big challenge, and then getting it into a consumer-friendly interface. But they're well ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. Okay, this all sounds hard. Why is it important? What? It sounds risky, I think, is the question. Why should we take the risk?
Yeah, so I think the number we shared a number earlier. 58% of executives said that they were concerned with dealing with rising customer expectations. I think that's the reason. Right. I think that rising customer expectations will drive people to the experiences that best meet their needs, and you really hope that that's your experience. And more than ever before, they're able to find which experiences will be best. They'll read reviews, they'll talk to people. Someone will rave on Facebook or Twitter, or they'll see, a VentureBeat article, or I should probably pick something that's a little more consumer friendly. I don't know, Time article.
Sure.
And they'll recognize that they can go elsewhere. And so if you aren't attempting to be early, you're going to be late. And it's dangerous to be late typically.
So it's hard, but competitive forces dictate that it's necessary.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so how did you decide that this would help work in, I guess, the rat trap? How did you start? Did you start with the customer journey map? Yes. Absolutely. We run and I'll let Michelle talk about this a little bit more, but we run a yearly innovation program for them that is comprised of workshops that generate both service map blueprints and customer journeys. Michelle, do you want to talk a little bit about how we got there?
Sure, Daniel. As Daniel just said, we do run a structured innovation program. We also have been working with Orkin as a client for about 7 years now. So we have a deep knowledge of their business and their industry, but we work with this innovation team on a regular basis to understand the challenges that they face in the marketplace. And, we recognize that there was an opportunity to fix a problem that is a labor-intensive and very costly problem, or at least to provide a proof of concept for a mechanism for dealing with that issue more effectively. And it was just a few hours, less than a day, to mock that up and have a functional trap that in fact did identify when it had been triggered, did take a picture of what was inside of it, did notify potentially a homeowner and a technician, so that you knew that you didn't have the neighbor's cat, that you in fact had a raccoon or something like that. But conceptually, it aligns with the model of this business problem that the technicians have in the field with critters of various sizes, including smaller rodents. And there are a lot of regulated industries for which control of rodent populations is a very significant thing. So the idea of using technology to track the traffic patterns and behaviors of a population of animals in and around a facility, whether it's a home or a manufacturing facility, represents a significant opportunity for them to provide better service, a higher degree of proof of performance of the effectiveness of the service that they do provide. And yes, it does start with a customer journey map.
Right. All right, here's a good one. How do you look at blended experiences and the required or sufficient information security? In some cases, security increases the customer experience, but oftentimes it doesn't. Is there a proven manner to include security by design while respecting the blended experience?
Let me think about that one. I don't know if there's a proven manner, and if Michelle, if you have a comment, you can jump in.
Well, I was going to offer up that we've done some work in medical, life sciences, and healthcare, where in fact we have significant regulatory issues to contend with, things like HIPAA, where you do have a set of constraints, and security and privacy are big components of those. And, you know, it's like any other design problem. Constraints don't, in fact, prohibit you from doing things, but they enable you to think constructively within a set of parameters that actually allow you to develop really beautiful experiences because you know what you're up against.
We work with a number of financial institutions as well, and obviously they're like life sciences, they have very strong security components, and we found that you can use alternate sign-in methods like biometrics to make the experience more elegant while maintaining that high degree of security. But I think there's also another way of looking at it, and in less stringent security requirements, people are willing to give up some information and some personal data in return for great blended experiences. So you may be more willing to have a company understand your preferences if they're then going to give you something in return for that. So there's a variety of security, I think, concerns when you're designing these blended experiences that vary across industries.
I think I would add one thing to that. There's the question of security, the question of privacy, and the question of sort of perceived privacy.
That's right, yeah.
And I think you don't want to make the misstep on the perceived privacy. And I think to Michelle and Daniel's points, people are willing to give up more information to get something better. But I think the reality is that there probably aren't proven ways of keeping people out if they're determined to get in. You know, there's social engineering methods, other things like that. Biometrics are absolutely part of the solution. But I don't know that there seems to be a proven method. It's more like putting a number of barriers in place.
Right.
In kind of a related component to that, Daniel mentioned something here about, you know, people are willing to give more information. And there's a lot of work being done around personalization of experiences. And, you know, I think that has to extend beyond simply understanding the analytics and exactly what people are doing, but also it has to do with understanding what people want to do and enabling the dialogue with them and between them and the brand to understand what it is that they do hope to accomplish, because people really will share a lot of information and enable you to deliver really great personalized experiences if you're willing to engage them in the conversation and then deliver against what they tell you.
Here's a good question to follow that one up, Michelle. Okay, the question is, I feel like I have two different types of customers, ones that go into my location and others that expect everything digitally. How do I know what my customers expect across both channels? How do I track what they are doing on location and merge that data with what they are doing digitally?
So it's a tough one. I think it's one that many, and I'll jump in with some thoughts, and LiquidHub, obviously, you guys will have some as well. It's a tough one. I don't know that you can ever really be sure that people are one thing or another. I imagine they switch in between depending on what their needs are, whether they're more complex or less complex. And I think it does come down to getting a real deep understanding of who they are and what they're trying to accomplish, so you can sort of understand what those things are first and whether they would prefer to come in store or take care of them online. And then there's a question in there around data merge and around understanding whether purchases are happening online or offline and how to sort of connect those. There's obviously the opportunity to use some sort of unique identifier like an email or a phone number, and then also the ability through data onboarding with some of the vendors that are out there to actually connect purchases and attempt to connect purchases offline with online. But I think that those are sort of maybe not 100% accurate at this point. I don't know if the LiquidHub guys would add anything to that.
Attribution modeling across channels is definitely still a challenge, and it's a challenge that everybody's grappling with, but we are seeing progress being made, and we are seeing companies that are aggregating data in new ways so that they can improve the attribution modeling. This is something even that Google struggles with at this point in time, but as we have more technology, more sensors, more things like that that are tracking our behaviors and our location, that information will become more useful and more clear going forward.
Yeah, and we also do ethnographic research, like shop-alongs and things like that. And one thing that I think that you'll find is that sometimes people are unreliable witnesses. They may tell you that they only do things digitally, but then they go to the store. So there's what's being reported and what's actually happening. And as we do this cross-channel attribution, I think we're going to get a much clearer picture of the reality of the situation. All right. Okay, so here we go. Where do you start? What do you do when you first are exploring a project? I have a mobile site and I have customer service reps. How do I improve the overall blended experience? So where do you start in creating a blended experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with journeys, but it also starts with finding the problems in the journeys more than anything.
Right.
So it's identifying the real business issue. In the case of the Edward Andrews example from the LiquidHub guys, it's getting people on the same page to make a decision. In the case of the UK's government digital services, it was, it's really hard to complete these key transactions online. Sort of triaging the biggest problems, and that's the kind of thing that only happens when you really sit down and look at what's happening and the data that you have, and what you know about your customer and where they're going from your customer understanding efforts, or from your web analytics efforts. So it's a long answer, but it's essentially about finding the problems and starting from there.
Yeah, and I would tack on to that and say that this comes right back around to understanding your customer and their needs, understanding that journey and what those moments are, and what the functional and emotional qualities of those moments are. So we have a construct that we call hearts and stars. And so you make some decisions based on the stars, based on the functional attributes of something. It's cheaper, it's faster, it has more horsepower, whatever that may be. But then you make other choices that are more emotional in nature. It's beautiful. I want that. I can imagine myself driving that or wearing that or being a part of that in some way. And so it's understanding the differences in when people make decisions that are functional and when people make decisions that are emotional, and having the right answer for them in those moments.
Yeah, and I think that's all really critical. And the other thing to think about is that potentially you should start small. Potentially you should bite off one spot. You know, if you were thinking about functional and emotional, it's, you know, thinking about how to solve some sort of functional problem that's in a small way and can prove some success. You know, that sort of thing helps sort of get the ball rolling, and you can then build up to larger and larger projects. That's one of the big things in the research that I've done about executing. You got to hit some singles before you start going for home runs, and that's just to keep sort of the organization momentum going, all in service of something bigger, but certainly small enough to bite off.
You know, one thing that seemed like a single until I actually experienced it myself was Uber. When there's no physical transaction. The first time I was in an Uber car and I just got out and walked away, that was just a single functional thing, but the emotional impact was powerful, and I became an Uber user. Mm-hmm.
That's actually one of the things that seems to jar people the most when they're new Uber customers. Right. It's you know, to the three things that I raised earlier, it's sort of less apparent what you need to do and how it works. So in a way, they've done a bad job of telling you how to do that, but it works fine because it's pretty great.
It's fantastic when it happens. That's right. All right. Well, I think we're out of questions. So maybe we'll wrap up just a few minutes early. Andrew, I can't thank you enough for your time today. You and Forrester have been fantastic partners and continue to help us understand what people are looking for in terms of consumer experiences, what blended experiences are all about, and how best to deliver them. So I thank you very much for your time today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you again soon.